Ukrainian drones have destroyed 40% of Russian oil refineries. The massive Yaroslavl oil refinery was also hit by drones today. The Russians fired at a German military aircraft. Will our partners really just let this slide? A complete paralysis of the offensive. The Russians are bogged down in the trenches and have gone to a Kobzon concert. The elimination of a top collaborator in the Kherson region. A precision operation by our intelligence service. We'll talk about all of this, friends. Right now on the Razborka project with Alexander Prepodobny. Let me introduce our guest. Friends, please welcome Roman Svitan, a military expert, to the Razborka project. Roman Grigorievich, hello, we're glad to see you.
Greetings, thank you for having me.
So, historically, it's unprecedented. Almost 40% of Russia's oil refinery capacity has been shut down. That's what Russian media are reporting after the Ukrainian drone attacks. In fact, more than 38% of refineries have simply stopped operating. Gasoline production in September dropped by 1 million tons. The deficit has reached 20%. Roman Grigorievich, we know that you always say that Russia's oil industry is the key to victory in this war. What do you think of the pace? What do you think of the results?
Exactly right. How can you defeat a resource-rich country? By destroying its resources. That's all there is to it. The recipe here is very simple. In order to defeat the Russian army, and any army is a derivative of the state itself, you have to destroy the state as such. It's easy to bring down the Russian Federation by destroying its resources, just like it was with the Soviet Union. It's exactly the same picture. The reduction in the flow of petrodollars, along with a decade-long war in Afghanistan, led to the collapse of the Russian Soviet Union into its constituent republics, which made up the state. It's the same situation with the Russian Federation. It's a federation. It includes 21 republics. That is the main 21 republics, plus several dozen other state entities. The only problem for Russians is that they haven't added the 22nd Republic, our Crimea, to their constitution. They didn't play their cards right. Their problem is with their nerve, and by the way, with their heads as well. They didn't take this point into account. It's possible to destroy Russia's resources because they're practically asking to be destroyed themselves, especially their main resource, the oil and gas sector. These figures you're talking about right now, they really are accurate. We're already approaching the destruction of half of Russia's oil and gas industry. As soon as there are enough forces to strike even deeper, in other words, to reach as far as the Urals, then we can say that half of Russia's oil and gas industry has been wiped out. Moreover, the destruction is being carried out very effectively and systematically. Now, we can already talk about a systematic planned approach. In other words, there is a certain algorithm for destruction. This is already clear because specific plants are being destroyed. Next, in a counter-move, oil pumping stations are being destroyed in order to force the Russians into a shutdown mode for oil production. This is very important. Why do we need to destroy the Russian transfer systems? We need to force the Russians to reduce oil production. In other words, they have to start shutting down wells. A shut-in well can't be restarted quickly. Sometimes for certain sites it takes several years to restart a well that has been shut down, especially with new technologies, which the Russians won't have access to anytime soon. So it's a very smart approach. Right now, our military leadership is focused on destroying the Russian oil industry. God willing, the main thing is that they don't stop. Because there's this problem. Last year we started out the same way and just as successfully, and we also managed to destroy a third of them. In May it was stopped. This year we also started off well. In March it was stopped. The main thing is that they don't stop now. If we keep up this pace and don't stop by the end of the year, the Russians will have nothing left.
Right now our viewers can see on their screens how the Yaroslavl oil refinery is taking up the baton from its fellow plants across Russia. It's burning beautifully. And you can see that there really is a significant fire causing serious damage to this facility that produces petroleum products. But Roman Grigorievich, regarding another factor, I see that at the Kuibyshev oil refinery in Samara, they're installing metal grates. And in fact, they're covering the entire area, I assume the important facilities on the plant's grounds, with these kinds of mesh screens. Could this become a problem? And if so, what could be used to break through such protection?
Yes, they've reached the Yaroslavl refinery. That's beyond Moscow, quite far to the southeast. It produces some very important components, by the way, which are targeted for destruction. Not just diesel and gasoline, it also produces aviation kerosene. 15 million tons of oil processed per year. So it's a very valuable target, and our Ukrainian defense forces did well to reach it. As for the fact that they're installing protective nets at the Kuibyshev refinery in Samara, well, they've actually put up these nets at almost all the refineries within a 500 to 700 kilometer radius, and they did that about half a year ago. These Kevlar aramid nets are very strong. It's extremely difficult to break through them. Now they found a way to burn through them, though even burning through is tough. Nevertheless, some of our drones are equipped with a specific chemical composition in their warheads that allows them to burn through aramid Kevlar nets. But now the Russians have started cobbling together these, you could say, grills, like the ones they put on tanks, but now they're making grills for their oil refineries. Again, everything will depend on what kind of munitions are used to strike the oil refinery. Continue striking the oil refineries. Drones might not be able to break through this kind of protection. That means we need missiles. In other words, we've long needed missiles with half-ton warheads. A warhead of at least half a ton will break through practically any kind of grill, no matter how well it's made. Novokuybishevsky is also a serious target. So this is an attempt. At least they have what's called a lettered refinery, where they're now trying to work out certain aspects. Well, I think our specialists will show how to neutralize, among other things, these grills at oil refineries using missiles.
I want to discuss with you what I think is one of the very important precedent-setting stories. What is happening to collaborators and those who believe that the Russian world will give them a new opportunity to become someone on the occupied territories. A drone, conditionally called Baba Yaga, carrying a large amount of explosives, eliminated the collaborator and Saldo's accomplice, the very one who walked with Putin in Moscow, boasting about the annexation of the Kherson region. His name was Vladimir Leontiev. In our footage, you can see that as Leontiev gets out of a parked car, a Ukrainian drone arrives. Well, apparently it is a Ukrainian drone. Could you please tell us what you think about this kind of special operation? I can't recall such a precise elimination using a drone that flew into occupied territory and, importantly, struck the collaborator's car with pinpoint accuracy. No one else was killed except him.
Well, most likely this is a special operation by our intelligence. We have a lot of reconnaissance groups and subunits that are tasked with and continue to carry out elimination missions. And this operation has been carried out by our special services since 2014. The Security Service of Ukraine, the Foreign Intelligence Service, the Main Intelligence Directorate, and the Special Operations Forces are all involved. Border Guard intelligence as well. Our border guards have their own intelligence units, which are quite active. We have at least half a dozen openly operating intelligence units, and there are also about half a dozen covert units that few people know about, but nevertheless, they also carry out tasks related to detection, reconnaissance before reconnaissance, coordination of actions, and of course, adjustment. They carry out combat missions and provide confirmation. In other words, they also use video footage, like what we are seeing now, as a means of objective control. So this is an entire process that has already been set in motion. Let me repeat, it has been going on for 11 years now. In other words, this movement is progressing, and the number of Russian terrorists being eliminated by various methods is increasing, including, by the way, drones being used directly to eliminate yet another Russian collaborator.
Roman Grigorievich, let's talk about something else now. I think it's extremely important to discuss what's happening in Europe right now, considering the ambiguous stance Europeans have taken regarding Russian sabotage. Not only have these activities not stopped, it seems they're actually gaining new momentum. Here's an example for you. Once again, Russia is flying drones over Norway near an airport called Brønnøysund, and drones are being detected there. In addition, Germany has recorded mass drone flights over critical infrastructure. So what are we talking about here? University hospitals, power plants, parliament buildings, and even European, German oil refineries are being flown over by drones. For example, this particular oil refinery, which was spied on especially closely, is reported to supply fuel to Hamburg airport. Right now, the Bundestag is preparing a law that will allow the army to shoot down such drones, even outside military facilities. Roman Grigorievich, what is your assessment? What are the Russians doing? What objectives are they pursuing with these drone flights? And are they preparing for actual strikes on such targets?
This is no longer just a provocation. The provocation was when about 24 drones flew into Poland. There was a provocation when basically flying boards with extended fuel range entered the area, and they practically didn't do anything. It was just to see how NATO would react. But after that, it was no longer just provocations. After that, there were combat sorties by reconnaissance drones, which are now creating digital maps of targets. That is before uploading into digital memory, so-called machine memory of missiles and drones, so that later during electronic warfare, they wouldn't pay attention to jamming and would still reach the target. Based on photographs, so-called digital photos. That's what these drones are doing now. In other words, they are digitizing the targets. And wherever the drones have passed, that's where you should expect something soon, or maybe not so soon. At the very least, Russian strike assets of various types. There could be drones there will be cruise missiles, model missiles with specific guidance on the final segments of their trajectory. In other words, this is the combat operation of Russian aerial strike assets. Why haven't they destroyed them yet? Well, that's a big question. They should have been destroyed first and foremost. They should have destroyed those drones that were entering Poland, the Baltic countries, and Romania years ago. And by the way, that's where they should have started, because now it's not about provocations anymore. They won't be engaging in provocations in Russia anymore. Then I'll repeat once again, active work is underway to digitize targets from the air.
Roman Grigorievich, about this incident with the shooting at the German S-130 transport plane at the Celle airbase in Lower Saxony. Let me remind you of the details. Unknown individuals used pyrotechnics to fire at it right after it took off. The plane was not damaged. Right now, as I understand it, an investigation is underway. Do you think Russians could be involved in such incidents, generally speaking, to, well, create, let's say, panic? It's important to note that this is a military aircraft in the military sphere, including in Germany, which is one of Ukraine's biggest allies.
There are two segments of a flight that are very dangerous for airplanes. For any aircraft, civilian, transport, military, amphibious, firefighting, or any other type, these are the moments when the plane is close to the ground. Takeoff and landing. At both of these stages, the plane is moving at low speeds, either trying to approach the ground or move away from it. It has a limited maneuvering range precisely because of the low speed and deployed flaps, which create a lot of air resistance. So a lot of problems can arise for an airplane specifically during landing and takeoff. Moreover, any external force, anything from fireworks to a bird, can lead to a disaster. So here too, it's probably not even a provocation anymore. This could very well be an attempt, among other things, to bring down this plane. Why? Let me repeat, this is a very difficult situation, a difficult stage of the flight. Takeoff and landing, especially for heavy aircraft. For transport planes, especially when they're loaded. So it's generally a challenging position during takeoff for a loaded plane. On approach, it's not always loaded. Sometimes it's empty. So there are certain advantages here. But during takeoff, of course, there are problems. Naturally, this was an attempt, definitely an attempt to create a certain emergency situation on board. That's why I think we can already say that these are not just provocations anymore. Russia has already started combat operations. Well, who else would need this besides the Russians? So who else right now could be putting pressure on the Europeans? Besides the Russians, there is no other force that would be involved or that would benefit from a certain destabilization of European, including aviation flights at various levels.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Roman Grigorievich, I'd like to discuss the situation at the front lines with you as we wrap up. According to the General Staff, you repelled dozens of attacks near Toretsk and Kupiansk, but before that, everyone keeps talking every day about these Tomahawk missiles, which the Trump administration is supposedly planning to supply to Ukraine. Supposedly, they're scaring Putin with them, waiting for a response, and J.D. Vance has also spoken about this. In short, it's totally unclear whether we'll get them or not, but I want to understand. If we do get them, how could that change the course of the war? Please explain clearly. What exactly makes these Tomahawks so different from what we have or have had up to this point?
Right now, the United States, the Pentagon, and NATO structures have several hundred Tomahawks that are about to be retired due to their service life. That is, missiles, like other equipment, have a certain operational lifespan. After that, if they haven't been used, their service life can be extended several times through specific technological processes, but there is a final limit, after which they simply can't be used for combat duty anymore. In principle, these missiles can be bought up for disposal by the Russian army. Such an option exists. We have bought some missiles in this way before. If you remember, we bought the Hydra 70 from the Canadians, several thousand missiles at the time. They were also meant for disposal, and some of them had already been disassembled. We then reassembled everything and used them against the Russians. This missile works quite well, but it's an unguided rocket. That's what it's called. But the Tomahawk is a cruise missile, and in principle, if we get it in sufficient quantities, again, the quantity is very important. If we only have a few dozen missiles, they won't accomplish anything. Of course, it might scare some old men in Moscow, but that's about it. In order to do some real work on enemy targets, it's very important for us to be able to take them out right now. Without logistics, without the support of the rear, no army can advance. That is, to stop the Russian offensive, you can destroy the Russian rear areas at a depth of 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers. So if we were to get those Tomahawks, yes, it's a sea-launched missile, but in recent years, ground-based launchers have also been produced. They took what's called the Mk-41 launcher, which is originally for naval use and has 64 silos. They took one silo, put it on wheels, and created a mobile launcher for the Tomahawk called Typhoon. Sometimes it's translated differently. So with a sufficient number of these launchers, even just a dozen or 15, and at least a few hundred Tomahawks, you could completely stop the Russian offensive. The Russians simply wouldn't be able to bring up their rear or maintain contact. Nothing would work. Everything would be destroyed at the crossings. At railway junctions, at Russian depots, again, it's almost 1,500 kilometers to the Urals, 2,000 kilometers to the Urals, so the missile wouldn't reach that far. It's about 500 kilometers short of the Urals. In other words, with several hundred missiles, you could completely stop the Russian army during an offensive. In defense, it's a different mechanism, so you would need slightly different missiles. Ones with a shorter range, ATACMS or JASSMs, would be suitable for these tasks to finish off the Russian army. But to stop the offensive, to cut off the rear and disrupt logistics, Tomahawks would certainly do the job. We'll see. So theoretically, it's possible for us to receive them. Technically, it's possible. If a decision were made, first and foremost, we would be given ATACMS and JASSM ATACMS for the HIMARS. We have about 50 HIMARS JASSMs cruise missiles for the F-16s. We have about 50 F-16s, which are chasing cockroaches with fly swatters, as they say, but that's just a saying. They're actually carrying out combat missions against Shaheds for the most part. But in reality, of course, these are platforms that could operate with long-range strike capabilities. So we'll see. At least for now, there is some hope for this.
I want to ask you briefly, Russian propaganda is now spreading the narrative that if Tomahawks are launched at Russian territory, they should immediately press the red button. What do you think? Will they actually do anything if Tomahawks hit key military targets in Russia? Or are they capable of escalating things further up to nuclear weapons?
Definitely not. They have already used all the conventional weapons they could against Ukraine. They won't add nuclear weapons to their so-called arsenal, because they understand the order. As soon as even a single nuclear charge detonates on our territory, about 15 nuclear power plants in Russia will immediately go up in smoke. That's what opening Pandora's box means. We wouldn't spend years building our own nuclear device just to retaliate. We would immediately take out Russia's nuclear plants. That would mean at least 12 Chernobyls at minimum in the European part of Russian territory, rendering life there impossible for a very long time. Everyone in Moscow understands this perfectly well, including the leadership. Cesium, strontium, 30 to 70 years of half-life. Plutonium, which most of the old reactors run on, has a half-life of 24,000 years. Uranium-235 and 238, those have half-lives of 700 million and 7.5 billion years, respectively. So I don't just think, I'm absolutely certain, 100%, that the Russians won't reach for any red button, knowing that almost the entire European part of Russia would be blown to pieces.
That's just a fact. And continuing on the topic of the front lines, Turkish fishermen, as we're showing our viewers right now, caught another Ukrainian surface drone, which most likely took part in the raid on Tuapse and Novorossiysk. That's the kind of story, that's the kind of war we're dealing with. Roman Grigorievich, regarding the front, as I mentioned, in September, the advance of Russian occupiers slowed down according to Deep State. They managed to capture only half as much territory as they did in August. Of course, there was still some progress, but analysts point out that the biggest territorial losses on our side happened in the Novopavlivka direction. 53% of all the square kilometers captured. What's your assessment of the situation on the front lines? Would you say that these so-called summer campaigns are coming to an end?
The summer campaigns will last until the winter frost set in. The whole point of dividing into summer and winter campaigns is about the shift from positive to negative temperatures. So as long as there are no sustained sub-zero temperatures, the summer military campaign will continue. The Russians still have enough strength left to keep it going for another month and a half, maybe 2 or 3 months. Basically until December, until the end of the year, they can carry out offensive operations at the current level, similar to what we saw a month ago, mainly by gradually pushing forward. They have a steady, albeit slow, positive dynamic, relying for now on manpower and continuing to use it. They try to bring equipment up to the line of contact to support their infantry, but the equipment gets destroyed before it even arrives, sometimes 15 to 20 kilometers out, sometimes even 30 to 40, especially the vehicles stationed in the army's rear. So they no longer count on their equipment. They're hoping for an operational breakthrough, since our forces have mostly managed to hold the line, especially with the help of drone systems, and by limiting the use of enemy equipment in breakthroughs, the Russians will now burn through the rest of their reserves. About 150,000 Russian soldiers who, over the next few months, will try to advance at the cost of their own lives. Roughly speaking, that's about a company to a company and a half, about 150 Russians per square kilometer lost as they try to take territory. But since they have these reserves, they're going to use them up. So in the coming months, the pace of Russian advances will be about what it is now, and it will likely stay that way along almost the entire Eastern Front, starting from, let's say, Vasilivka, the western part of the Zaporizhzhia front, all the way to Kupiansk. They'll try to push our troops out everywhere, capturing as much territory as possible by gradually squeezing us out. It's a slow rate of advance across the whole front, but it will continue nonetheless.
At the end, I think it's also important to highlight the successes of our soldiers. For the first time, such a result was achieved by the air defense team of the 63rd Brigade. FPV drones managed to shoot down a Geran drone, which is basically a copy of the Iranian Shahed drone. Previously, the guys had only shot down drones like Zala, Lancet, and a few dozen Molniya drones, but this is the first time they've shot down a Shahed-type drone. Roman Hryhorovich, do you think this could become a solution for us, using FPV drones to shoot down Shaheds? Or is this more a matter of the particular skill of this air defense operator, and scaling this up would be difficult?
Is definitely the skill of the air defense operator. Why? Because after all, it's quite difficult to shoot down, say, a Geran drone with FPV drones, especially if it's running on jet propulsion. You just can't catch up with it. So first of all, the situation has to be right, meaning the opportunity has to present itself, like when they shot down a helicopter, including with FPV drones. But this isn't a constant or stable way to accomplish a combat mission. To reliably secure our airspace from Russian drones, the optimal solution is to increase the density of Army air defense. That means, in addition to our guys working with FPV drones, they should at least have interceptor drones, faster ones, and short-range anti-aircraft missile systems with inexpensive missiles, like the Raven systems the British supplied us with, for example. So we need to increase the density of our forces, and then we can hope that regardless of how many Russian drones there are, they simply won't be able to cross the front line. That's what needs to be done. We just need to integrate air defense brigades into the corps deployed along the strong front line and supply them with enough interception systems, supply them with enough